Maybe.
It just picks it up. Okay.
But they can hear you.
We're ready.
I believe in you. Bye.
Hi.
Take it away.
Oh, sorry, wrong screen. There we go. We're here to talk to you about Backdrop CMS. Thank you all for coming. How many of you have heard of Backdrop before today?
Yeah.
So this presentation is going to be the same one we gave yesterday. So if you feel inclined to go and run off to something else, you can. Although our demo today will be much shorter. Rather than 3 hours long, it'll be 20 minutes or so. So more stuff in less time. For those of you who haven't heard of Backdrop, it's a fork of Drupal, which is why we're here at a Drupal camp. It's technically a fork of really, really early Drupal 8, but back when it looked and felt a lot like Drupal 7. So when we get into the demo, you'll see that Backdrop feels like Drupal 7. If you know and love Drupal 7, you'll probably also like Backdrop. Backdrop has a target audience specifically for small to medium-sized businesses and nonprofits. We're excluding the enterprise from our target because we know the enterprise is already going to have a fantastic content management system, and we're specifically focused on trying to come up with something for the little guys who maybe aren't feeling comfortable about where the future may lead them in Drupal. Backdrop, we're hoping, will be another tool in the tool belt of web development shops. I think for a long time in the Drupal community, people have been a little bit guilty of fixing every problem with Drupal. Like anytime someone brings something to you and they're like, I have this issue, you're like, oh, I can do that in Drupal, I can do that in Drupal, I can do this in Drupal too. And part of that's just because we love Drupal, but also once we're over the learning curve, it becomes really easy to apply that solution anywhere. But that isn't necessarily the best choice for any given project, or maybe the team or the people who have to support it in the long run. And there are a lot of fantastic tools out there today that maybe weren't available 10 years ago. Things like Squarespace is a really great tool that you can use to just slap up a website really quickly with very little time and very little cost. Something like WordPress is a little more comprehensive. You can host it yourself, but it still can deliver a great blogging experience if all you need is a blog. Maybe all you really need is WordPress. Drupal is going to be there to handle anything you could possibly imagine, but there's going to be a little bit of a gap that's opening up between the overlap of what a WordPress site can do and what a Drupal 8 site can do, and Backdrop's hoping to sort of fit in the middle there and do everything that Drupal 7 does today.
So we're the founders of Backdrop, Jen and myself, Nate. Jen is the project lead and handles most of the people management within the Backdrop project, and I'm the technical lead. That makes me a core committer, essentially, although we have two other core committers that are also contributing or reviewing and committing code. We want to make clear that Backdrop is a project that is founded on the love of Drupal, that we love Drupal. We've built our entire careers on Drupal, in fact. And what we're doing with Backdrop is basically a continuation of the Drupal that we know. Where we've used Drupal to build hundreds of sites probably for our clients. We've been longtime contributors to the project and longtime contributors to the Drupal community. Jen and I both are core developers, even in the Drupal 8 cycle. Jen was responsible for the Twig initiative, basically pulled that initiative out of thin air and then really ran with it, and then turned it into something that could be done in Drupal 8. I myself was the primary driving force for putting in CK editor in core, and I wrote the dialog system in Drupal 8. But going back in time, Drupal 7, Drupal 6, Drupal 5 contributions, we've been there both in core and in contrib. We're both trainers as well, or previously had been trainers within the Drupal community. I still work for Lullabot, and Lullabot was one of the first Drupal training companies, and we went all over the world training people in in-person trainings, as well as we wrote a book. And we have done online video trainings, and before there was online video trainings, DVD trainings. And through all of these experiences of training people, we feel like we've experienced the pain points of those people that are learning just for the very first time, and we're trying to ease that learning curve with our attempts at Backdrop.
We're also big supporters of the Drupal community too. Like long before I ever contributed my first line of code, I ran a registration desk at a camp a lot like this one. And I think what drove me to the Drupal project was the people that I met in it and the problems they were having and how Drupal could be a solution for them. We talk to a lot of people. Obviously, we travel around and attend a lot of camps and conferences around the world. We train people all around the world. And I think that where we're coming from is not something that we've just thought up ourselves, but it is kind of coming from the larger community of Drupal being too hard, too expensive, just too much, and trying to figure out how we can get it to be something that's more manageable for all of these people who a lot of times aren't developers. They're just people with a problem and they're trying to get Drupal to solve it for them.
So before we get into the actual project and show you guys how we differ from Drupal, we also want to talk about how the structure of the project is different from Drupal. When we started out with the Backdrop project, we had an opportunity to revisit the way that the project itself is governed and the way that we make decisions, because we wanted to make sure that the Backdrop project, as we established it, would kind of be safe from drift against like its audience and drift from maybe its mission and what we had hoped to do with the fork. And so to kind of fulfill those goals, we set up a leadership model based on Apache called the Project Management Committee Model, or PMC. The PMC is a model that Apache has used in all of its projects, and basically kind of like a little bit more democratic way of managing a project in which there are a group of individuals instead of a single leader, basically, that when conflicts arise or decisions need to be made or we need to decide the decision of the overall project, the PMC discusses it as a group and then votes, and then that's the way that decisions are made. You want to talk about the people?
Sure. So we're not alone. We've got 6 people helping manage Backdrop today, and each one of our PMC members is supposed to be representing a particular constituent of our community. So we also thought that it was really important that the people who are making decisions for the project are not only the super technical core committer type, but that we have representations from people who own businesses. Like if we do this from a technical decision, how is that going to affect your ability to sell Backdrop as a service or as a product to your clients? We want to make sure that we have people who are representing contrib developers, so if we make a change in core, they have the ability to say, whoa, 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 that's going to be too hard on contrib to keep up with that. We have people representing site builders, so maybe people who don't do any coding at all, super focused on making sure our user interface is, like, especially if we're going to be moving down market and competing with WordPress, Backdrop's got to be a lot easier to use. And we've got people representing the front end, so if we have something crazy like Twig that comes up as an idea, we've got front enders to tell us, yes, it's good, or no, it's not. And we want to make sure that we have representatives. Right now, it's based on your role with the software, but we also want to make sure that those representatives are going to be representing race or geographic location, languages spoken, so that if we end up having like a huge number of people in Latin America that adopt Backdrop, we want to make sure they've got representation in Project Management Committee as well. So it's about making sure that everybody who's using the software has somebody who represents them, helping guide the future of the software they're using.
So the PMC's responsibilities, I mentioned to handle conflict resolution when 2 developers are in disagreement or the project in general is under some kind of woeful situation, then the PMC is set out to handle it. Setting the overall direction of the project, that includes our mission statement, our audience, and philosophy. And to make sure that each change that we do as we're developing the software, that is in alignment with the project's goals. And so when the PMC gets together and talks about particular things, you hear really frequently things around the nature of how does this fit with our philosophy, and how, is this thing that we're attempting to do, is that the best fit for our target market? And so we do a lot of discussion where people bring in their own opinions a little bit, but they can set them aside their own personal needs and say, what are the needs of the project? And make sure that the project's changes all are in alignment with what we originally set out to do. And if there's a situation in which people say, this doesn't seem appropriate for our project, but it really seems like something we should do, then we have an explicit process for changing the project philosophy to make it so that we change the philosophy, and then we would change the software to make it so that it's very clear that there's been a shift in direction or pivot in the overall project. by updating our overall philosophy. So in order for this model to work, the philosophy of the project has to be defined, because otherwise you're just going to get a bunch of opinionated people together, all expressing their own disparate needs and wants, and it makes it so that you get like more conflict rather than less. And so by defining the philosophy, it makes it so that you can make decisions a lot easier, they're much more consistent, and you attract people based on what that philosophy is. So the Backdrop principles, you can read more about them at backdropcms.org/philosophy, but we'll go through them here real quickly.
So the first one is backwards compatibility is important, and that was our #1 principle because we came here from all of this experience working on Drupal 8 and realizing that compatibility between 7 and 8 was going to be really hard on all of the contributors that have to update their code, all of the people who have written custom modules or custom themes in Drupal 7, and the upgrade path for anyone who's on Drupal 7 and wants to get to Drupal 8. We looked at the amount of change that was required and said, we need to make sure that backwards compatibility is more important in Backdrop so that it is easier for people to stay on top of these updates. So that's the first one that came around. Lately in Drupal, backwards compatibility has also become important. They noticed the same thing we noticed, though, several years later. But I think that the two projects are going to come up with solutions for those problems in ways that are aligned with the philosophy of each, which is going to be a little different. And so we'll be able to see how that evolves over time. The second one is to write code for the majority. This is also something that people are struggling with a little bit in the transition from 7 to 8. One of Drupal's philosophies is that they're always going to use modern design patterns.
The latest and greatest.
The latest and greatest is how it's phrased, which means something like Symfony is a great fit for Drupal, something like Twig is a great fit for Drupal. But that comes with the cost of everybody needing to learn those latest technologies. And some people love that, right? Like that's one of the great things about working in web is that you never stand still, you're always learning new stuff. But not everybody always needs to know the latest of everything. There are plenty of fantastic, really old tools out there that do their job really well. PHP tends to be a lot of people's first programming language, and trying to introduce more complicated patterns is sometimes really hard for people who are new to it. So Backdrop decided that instead of adopting the principle of latest and greatest is what we want to do, we want to make sure that our code is readable and accessible to the most people possible. So that means using the lowest common denominator, which is patterns that are easily readable top to bottom of the page, even by people who are non-developers, choosing languages that are the most common, things like JSON over YAML, and just making sure that most people, this is not software for developers, this is software for people. There are more people than there are developers in the world, and we need to cater to them. The next one is to include features for the majority. This is also something Drupal 8's been doing, but making sure that modules that you use on every one of your sites are included in core. Making sure that modules that you turn off on every one of your sites are removed from core. Just trying to make sure that the product that comes out of the box is going to be, 80% of that is going to be applicable to 80% of the sites that are running Backdrop. And if you want to contrib module to something else, that's fine. That'll be there too. But we want to make sure that the core is lean and mean and is suiting as many people as possible to the best of its ability. The next one is to ensure Backdrop can be extended. Obviously, if we're going to be making core leaner, we've got to make sure that contrib can still fill the void there. And so Drupal would not be what it was today without its APIs. That's really important to us as well. We've got to make sure Backdrop's APIs are just as good and we can fill all of the needs for all of our users with contrib. Meeting low system requirements. This is specifically so that you can run Backdrop on shared hosting. Drupal used to be great at running on shared hosting back in the day, and over time we've gotten to this place where we need to have Drupal-specific hosting platforms and Drupal-specific optimization because Drupal's gotten a little bit too slow. And that's a pain point that people have struggled with late in Drupal 6 and in Drupal 7. It's not going to be getting easier in the near future. There's been a lot of great improvements that are going on in Drupal 8. We're kind of looking at those and taking some of those into Backdrop, but we're also thinking about how can we suit our audience better with the code we're starting from and still be able to release a product you can run on super affordable shared hosting platforms. And then planning and scheduling releases, this is also something that we thought would be a huge benefit to our community. Backdrop has a release schedule. Every 4 months we come out with a new version of Backdrop, and that makes it so that if you're a developer, you can schedule time once every 4 months to update your site. If you're a company running a Backdrop site, you can set aside budget because you know every 4 months there's going to be an update. It's just a little easier to manage if all of those releases are on time and you know what's coming. So if we have a feature that's not ready for the next version of Backdrop, it doesn't get in, it gets pushed, and we release Backdrop on time with the features that are ready. And then the last one is to remain free and open source. Open source, obviously, because we couldn't have forked the project if it wasn't. We've inherited Drupal's license, but we love Drupal's license, so it's no problem. And free is also something that's important to us also because it'll keep the barrier to entry low for anyone who might be looking at adopting a platform, especially when we're hoping to save them money by using.
So the overall mission of Backdrop is also on our philosophy page, and this is kind of the guiding statement for the entire project. Backdrop CMS enables people to build highly customized websites affordably through collaboration and open source software. And there's a couple of keywords in here, including people. Backdrop is intended to be a project that is not self-serving. It's just it's a project that is intended to help people, and that's our overall objective, is to make it so that people can share and collaborate with information. But also affordably, that one of our primary driving principles is how can we reduce the overall cost of owning a website. So some ideas on that. Increase the out-of-box functionality. We made a huge amount of headway in increasing the functionality that is included out of the box and covers all the use cases that you probably would expect a modern CMS to include. Making development easier and faster, making maintenance easier and faster, and is that it? And making upgrades easier and faster.
So these are some of the things that we've identified as obvious pain points that people are experiencing now. But obviously we're starting from Drupal, and there's a lot of pain in terms of the cost of sneaky hidden costs of long-term website ownership with Drupal. And so this is one of the things that's really important to us going forward. We're going to solve things one at a time, and we're going to keep looking at the project and saying, what is making this time-consuming for my developers, or what is making it expensive for my company to afford, and how can we bring those costs down and continue to do that over time. Most important too is every time we make a change to Backdrop, we've got to consider the cost of that change, the cost not only in terms of how much it will cost you owning the website, but the cost in terms of what it does to the community in making that change. Is that something that's going to benefit? Is the change worth the cost? Which is, I think, a question that is not often asked in open source development. So, are you curious about using Backdrop today? Of course you can use it today, that's why we're here. We've had 8 on-time releases since Backdrop first came out. It came out January...
On to me, sorry.
What?
Nothing. On-time releases, yes.
Did I say one too many releases? On me. It came out January 15th, 2015. So we've been out for more than 2 years now, which is great. 2+ years of Backdrop, been out and stable and releasing on time. Our release schedule, as we mentioned before, is once every 4 months, with the next release schedule for September 15th. So we just had one on the 15th of May, which included a couple of new features, and we've got a new one coming up in a few months. And this is also going to that thing of, if you're running on Backdrop, we want to give you new features for free. We want to make sure they're features that are important, things like maybe modules you're already using that get moved into core, improved user experience, whatever it is. We want to make sure there's always an incentive for you to upgrade. So we're trying to put good stuff in it that's necessary. So what about contrib? We talked about how Drupal wouldn't be what it was today without the contributed code, right? That's the biggest concern with Backdrop as well. We went through the list of the top 48 modules that are installed on Drupal, just because I ran out of room on the slide, or I would have done more, and tried to visually depict what's happened for those modules in Backdrop. The blue checkbox means that's something we've moved into core. So you can tell the majority of the top modules for Drupal are in core for Backdrop. That's 28 of them. Which is kind of to our goal of trying to get it to do more out of the box. 15 of them already exist in contrib because we've got people who are running on Backdrop and need those modules. 3 of them are underway. A couple of those are really complicated and we're kind of taking our time with. And then only 2 of them are not started. So that's pretty good, I think, as far as the top modules. And we've got some total numbers here as well. We have 382 projects, so that includes modules, themes, and a new project type we have called layouts. And 294 of those are ready for use today. So these numbers compared to Drupal numbers seem small because Drupal's got thousands of everything, but Backdrop is only 2 years old. And if you look at any other open source project that's 2 years old, we're actually doing amazingly well. So what about the people? These numbers you can also find on backdropcms.org. Right now there's 10,000 downloads of Backdrop. That's a statistic from GitHub. We've got 664 people who created user accounts on backdropcms.org. There's not really much else you can do on there right now, so I think that's fairly exciting in and of itself. We've had 80 people that have had distinct commits to Backdrop core since we forked, and 64 people who are currently maintaining our contrib projects today. One of the things you can do if you create an account on backdropcms.org is list your company as being a Drupal company or web development company that's interested in taking on Backdrop work. And so far we have 31 of them who have said, hey, I'm interested in doing Backdrop work as well as Drupal, which I think is also pretty good. There's some big Drupal companies in there who are interested in doing Backdrop too, which I think is great, fits along with our idea of this being another tool in your tool belt. So on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, we have a weekly meeting where we just check in on all of the stuff that we're working on in Backdrop. So if anyone has any questions about what's going on or have ideas they want to share with us, you're welcome to join in. It's a public hangout. If you don't want to participate in the meeting and just want to see what's going on, these are also live streamed on YouTube, and you can just watch at any time and see what it is coming up in the next release or what it is we're working on in parallel with Backdrop, the software. Our code is all on GitHub. So GitHub, Backdrop. We have a live chat. We're using Gitter. So if you have a GitHub user account, you can chat just through your browser. You don't need any extra software. We're on Twitter, and our website is backdropcms.org. So who wants to see it?
Hey, everybody.
Are there any questions about the philosophy before we jump into a demo? Yes, go ahead.
I wasn't there at the start of the talk, but so Backdrop is a fork of Drupal 7?
It's a fork of really early Drupal 8 before Symfony went in.
Okay.
For practical purposes,
yeah,
though, you can
it feels
consider
exactly
Drupal 7.
like Drupal 7.
Okay, and is there a path to upgrade a site from Drupal 7 to Backdrop?
Yep, you can run update.php from a Drupal 7 install, and it'll upgrade into Backdrop. So Backdrop treats Drupal 7 as its previous version.
All right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of actually some crazy fancy number things in there that it's like because 7 is higher than 1, right? But we have all of these fancy things that make update.php see 1000 as being after 7000, like in the update process and everything like that. The overall change, the similarities in database schema are like, they're really, really, really close. It takes less than a couple minutes, less than a minute in many cases, to upgrade like a fairly complex Drupal 7 site into Backdrop with all of your content and everything that is in core, which that list of modules that we showed you includes modules like email, date, link, redirect, path auto, transliteration. Can you think of any other ones? All of those.
Transliteration, you just said that.
Yeah, all of those modules, all of their configuration. Oh, and views.
And an view mode.
All of those modules and their configuration are upgraded into their core equivalents in Backdrop.
And do you have to delete those modules from the contrib folder, from the sites all?
Yeah, well, what you generally do is you take a copy of your database from Drupal 7, and then you point a fresh install of Backdrop at the copy of your database, and then you run update.php. Yeah,
so you just don't add them into your Backdrop site because they're already in core, and then the core upgrade will upgrade all of the data from the Drupal 7 site into the format Backdrop needs, which is the only major difference there is converting from variables in the database to configuration files.
Yeah.
And I guess most of the custom stuff, you'd have to do tweaks, but very little.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
That's the goal. Like there are API changes. Obviously, we needed configuration management to be competitive with Drupal 8. That's something everybody was really excited about. And so that's the biggest change from 7 to Backdrop. And so if you've written a module and you've used like variable set or variable get, you've got to change that to config get or config set. We have a Drupal compatibility layer in Backdrop, so if you call any functions like Drupal add CSS that has Drupal in the function name, there's a wrapper function in Backdrop where it'll call Backdrop add CSS. But over time, you'll probably want to get rid of those and turn off the Drupal compatibility layer. So it just kind of buys developers a little more time. You can get it working really fast. Same thing, we left the variable table there, so you can get it working really fast. But if you want to leverage the power of config, you'll need to make those changes eventually.
All right. Thank you.
Let's see, where's your backdrop? The backdrop?
Yeah.
Lampton?
Yep. What are you after?
Oh,
Code.
yeah, code. Sorry, now you're getting me all distracted to talk about.
It's open and so
There we go. There we go. So Backdrop is arranged in the same way as Drupal 8 is. I was actually the one that did the patch to do the core directory in Drupal 8. This one? Oh, okay. So I like the bigger one. But all of Core's modules are under the core directory. And then we've done some things like settings.php has actually moved up to the root. And modules, layouts, and themes are also in the root now.
And files.
And files. And the sites directory is actually most of the time empty. Looks like you might have put something in. I mean, yeah, you've got something in here. And then the README describes how to use multi-site. So instead of like pushing multi-site in people's faces and making it so that you always have this site's defaults files thing, like it's much more geared towards multi-site being the exception rather than the rule. Yeah. But it's still there. Multi-site functionality, definitely all still functioning. So this is Backdrop out of the box. And one of the greatest things about Backdrop out of the box is that it doesn't look like Drupal. Well, at least it doesn't look like Bartik. So it's nice that we have a new front-end theme. We also have a new back-end theme.
Well, we updated the back-end theme.
But in any case, just getting onto a modern Drupal 7, if you want to think of it that way, is substantial. It is a huge jump from Drupal 7 as it was released 7 years ago. Drupal 7 came out just before the iPhone did, and like the mobile web was not a thing when Drupal 7 came out. So things like responsive functionality are just completely absent from Drupal 7 out of the box. Backdrop, we have put in things like admin menu. Even in Drupal 8, there's still a toolbar instead of a drop-down menu for some reason. But in Backdrop, we've actually literally taken admin menu, the contrib module, removed toolbar, and put in admin menu with some modifications to make it touch-friendly and responsive. And also some things like the search functionality. So if I want to search for a particular piece of functionality, I can like find it that way, and it'll expand out the menus to show where that functionality is in the system. Let's see, other things in the world of responsiveness as we get smaller here. So you can see the admin menu collapses down. And also, if we go down small enough, not only does the admin menu collapse, we have a front-end menu system that also collapses because having a collapsible menu or mobile-friendly menu out of the box is rather important. And this is a menu style. We have this ability to display menus in different ways. And out of the box, it's mobile-friendly like this that collapses down on small screens, but it is also hierarchical, that you can do drop-down menus. If you nest something underneath the About section of your site, then it's going to create a drop-down hierarchy for your front end that is also mobile-friendly that will collapse. Let's see, and then we have some sample content created as well, like this first post. And if I go to edit this piece of content, we get into the back end. So this is our first look at the administrative interface of Backdrop. Oh yeah, sure. Which includes some things that you would expect in a modern CMS, such as a rich text editor. Rich text editor functionality is quite analogous to Drupal 8, considering I wrote both of them. But that includes some things like image functionality. If I went to bunnies. If I want to upload an image and then align it right and include a caption, I can do so. And then I can enter in the caption text. Cute bunnies. size it down, and do all the things that you would expect as far as image handling is concerned. Let's see, that up there. There we go. Let's see.
No, sorry, I turned that on.
Other things that are included in here. Let's see, here we go. URL settings. So this is just path auto, as you might expect, but also redirects. We found out really quickly that if you have path auto in core, you very quickly need redirects, because as you're changing, if your path auto includes the title of a node, and you change the title of a node, then you've changed the URL, and so therefore you need to redirect from the old location to the new one. And so these are both included out of the box and configured in a way that makes sense out of the box. What's
Content
next?
type.
Content types. Okay, so over here in the world of content types, so out of the box we have two content types, page and post, taking a page out of WordPress's book. And configuring a content type lets you do things like, we've simplified the way that you can create things for the user experience. When you're creating a content type, it includes all of the functionality for that content type, not requiring you to jump over to the permission screen to set up that content type, or jump over to the path auto settings to go set up the aliasing settings. We made it so that all of the settings for the content type are all in one place. And that really helps cut down on what we call pogo sticking in the Drupal administration area, where it's like going down, you configure something going up, and then going back down, and configuring the permissions going back up, and then going back down. You also can do some things like out of the box we've turned off, well, unfortunately this out of the box, say we do have some other modules turned on. We have translation support turned on.
Sorry.
Which, yeah.
We can turn it off if you want. I was testing something during the keynote this morning and I forgot it was there.
Yeah, but you also can turn off more things than before, like the options for sticky. You can now disable the options for sticky and disable the options for promotion and things like that. So it doesn't make sense to have sticky pages, for example, but Drupal has always kind of enabled or forced you to have those checkboxes. Let's see. Out of the box functionality, of course, we also have views. So if I go to the views interface and add a new view, anybody that's familiar with views in Drupal 7, this should be really right at home. But views, for anyone that's not familiar with that, is a query builder that allows you to show lists of content in any way basically you can possibly imagine. And so I'm going to create a quick list of posts that are an unformatted list of titles. And so there we go. And oh, I should have added content type. The dialog system in
Views.
in views is
It's
all
the same as what's in core. You'll notice the user interface here has gotten a little update. It matches our admin theme. Views used to have its own kind of color coding. It was a little disconcerted, but now since it's all part of core, we've cleaned it up a little bit. We've also done some UX cleanup on terminology so that when you're editing things, the things you're editing is content. When you're configuring things, the things you're configuring is configuration, so that there isn't kind of that, oh, I don't know, what is it edit or configure? And we've made all the interfaces that had both of those decide whether it's content or configuration and use the correct terminology.
Yeah, while I'm in the administration area also, I can't help but notice this big red 1 here.
Oh, yeah.
And that big red 1 is actually one of the most incredible UX improvements that we've done, I believe. And that is simply, if there's an error on your status report, it just puts the number of errors in the administration bar. And I can't tell you the number of times that's caught me and been like, oh, you need to run update.php, or update.php is unprotected. Or in this case,
You need to update your MySQL database.
yeah, your MySQL, a little bit more complicated, but your MySQL database tables need to be updated to support emojis. Is actually what this is saying. Yeah, it's also kind of like just being parallel with how the backdrop mentality versus what Drupal is more used to. In Drupal, there's a drush command to do the upgrade to support emoji. In Backdrop, it's part of core. Like, this is kind of the standard differentiation in approaches between how we operate as projects. Also, in that same nature, on the modules page, so the modules page normally is just the list of all modules that you have installed on your website, and that's still the case here. But there's also the tab for install new modules that searches, it connects to backdropcms.org and retrieves the list of all stable projects. And if you wanted to install a particular module, you can just say, add it to the installation queue, and then hit next. And this will download from backdropcms.org and then give you the ability to turn on those modules locally.
So we're removing the developer from the equation in a lot of places, but that doesn't mean that you can't operate in the same way. If you are a developer, you can still use Git. You can still put your configuration in code if you want to, but we want to make sure that the user interface is most important. That's our primary focus, because those are the people that need our help the most. Developers are smart. They'll figure out ways to do things using Drush, but our focus needs to be on the people who don't know how to do that.
In Drupal 7, actually, this functionality already exists. It's nothing new as far as security setup is concerned. The Drupal 7 can also install modules, but nobody ever does it because the interface it gives you is this one. Install from a URL. And what a terrible pattern to teach your users. Just copy and paste a URL from the internet and paste it in and then install that code. We shoved it under a place just for people that could possibly still want that functionality, but locking them in and giving them the curated list
These are safe.
as the front up option is a much better way of presenting users with a list of modules to install.
Can you still use Drush or an online tool?
Yeah, there is a Drush extension for Backdrop that gives you a set of commands. You just drop in your Drush commands folder, and then things like DrushGL will download from Backdrop on GitHub instead of from Drupal.org, and DrushN will enable modules. You need to use Drush version 8. There's Drush 7 and Drush 9 as well. And as long as you're using Drush 8, the Backdrop commands should work.
Yep, it's an extension. So you throw it in, and then Drush magically knows how to not do just Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, but also Backdrop.
All contrib modules are on GitHub.
Yep. We have a contrib group that has ownership by anyone who's a contributor. And so if you have a contrib module, you apply to join the contrib group. We do a quick review of your module to make sure you understand differences between Drupal and Backdrop. It's meant to be mostly helpful. And then we'll grant you access to the entire repository, and you have to agree, like, I will only commit to my own project. But having that kind of group sense of ownership, I think, is also going to help create a stronger community, because there are people who can step up and say, like, hey, the maintainer is sick. I want to help out and maintain this project, and we have a process for sharing responsibility that way now, too. Yeah,
and the downloads on GitHub, we have a packager that still lives on backdropcms.org, akin to the packager on Drupal. But it's rigged into GitHub's hook system. So as you create it, if you create a tag and create a release on GitHub, backdropcms.org gets a webhook. It downloads the latest release, runs the packager, and then attaches it as a binary to GitHub. So this little packaged version here is the packaged version. And that includes things like when it was packaged and the version number and those things.
The same thing as Drupal. So.
The same thing Drupal does, only it's hosted on GitHub instead. Okay, but the main functionality that we like to demonstrate during these presentations is the capability of layouts. Layouts are an all-new system in Backdrop that is a pretty serious differentiator, both from Drupal 7 and 8. And so on any individual page, it is the structure of the blocks on the page is guided by a layout. And so layout in Drupal 7 and in Drupal 8 is determined by the theme, and so a theme has certain regions, and then you can place blocks into those regions. In Backdrop, themes no longer have regions. Instead, there's a separate concept called layouts, and layouts can be used on any theme. So a theme basically is only responsible for presentation and no longer responsible for any kind of structure. Out of the box, it comes with these 10 layouts, and so these layouts,
they're all responsive, and they're using the Bootstrap 4 grid system, so it's also something that's familiar to most people. This was based on a project in Drupal called Radix Layouts, which also used Bootstrap. Radix Layouts contained 33. We narrowed that down to what we thought would be the 10 most commonly used layouts. And these should all work on all themes, as Nate said, because they have their own grid system included. Your themes can choose to or not use that grid system as they please. And you should be able to change your themes freely without needing to rearrange all of your blocks.
So, for example, this is the out-of-box collection of layouts. There's one for the home page. And so if you wanted to make your home page be different from the rest of your site, in the out-of-box configuration, that means that it's a single column, and all of the other pages on your site are 2 columns. And we have certain things like the home page.
Header and block.
Oh, yeah. What about it?
Just because it's new.
Oh. So like on any layouts, actually, the common configuration is that you would have like the header block and the primary navigation up at the top. The header block contains what used to be theme settings, like show the logo, show the site name, and show the site slogan. And you can choose which menu you want to display up there at the top. Also in any block, we have style settings, and style settings allow you to set a block class, but it also allow you, if you so choose, to set all of the markup control or output by that block in a similar way to views. How views, you can choose all of your tags and markup and everything like that. So if you think that this particular block makes more sense as an aside or a section from a semantic standpoint, then you can change what those wrappers are. Add classes, change your heading levels, and then change your wrapper on the inside of the content as well. And then visibility conditions. Visibility conditions are kind of similar to what we have in Drupal 7, that you can say like only show this block under certain conditions. Like if you're showing the site in French, then show this block. Or if you're showing this site to a particular user that is an administrator, then show this block. Things of that nature. Oh, yeah, and it's just so like the things that I take for granted are so much. This interface is drag and drop based, so if you want to rearrange your navigation or header block or add any functionality, you just move the content around.
And it works on touch devices.
Yeah, the most recent change that we did actually includes things like this latest version of Backdrop includes moving things around like the page title and other things that previously had been hard-coded into the layout location. And so
messages or tabs.
Yeah, so now you can control literally every piece of markup that is output by the page can be controlled from this administrative interface. Previously, messages and tabs and things like that would just always be output in the same location as defined by the layout. Now, like you can see, if I add this page title, it makes it so I can move it around. But if I remove the page title, then it becomes locked back in its original location. And so that's to prevent nasty accidents where it's like you remove the messages block and then you don't have messages on your entire site. So it actually reverts to the default unless you place it elsewhere. What I want to do with layouts, though, is not actually modify the home page too much. I'm going to make a new layout. And new layouts, when you create them, you can both create a brand new path out of thin air, or you can override any existing path within Backdrop to change how its layout works. So if you specify a path, then this one will take precedence, but if you don't, then the default layout will be used. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to override the path node/%, which is the path for all content on the site. And by typing in node/%, Layouts has identified the fact that that means that you're going to acquire a new context. A context is basically a collection of blocks and conditions that relate to the path that you are currently on. And so by adding a wildcard in here, it makes it so that that wildcard becomes a context. And it makes it so that visibility conditions, both in blocks and on the overall layout, have new capabilities. So in this case, I can say node type. I only want to make it so that this layout applies to posts and not to pages. So previously we didn't have a node type condition, but with that context we do. So now I could do something simple, like I could move the content around and add like an image if we had an image. I guess we don't have one, but I had that view of latest posts. There we go.
So every field of that content type will appear in the list.
Yep. So if you wanted to take like the image and like move it around and stuff like that, yeah, you can put it anywhere you want in every field, and you can configure it with its formatter option. So you can say like, you know, use whatever image style you want and link it, and all of the options that you get from Field UI you can also do within a layout.
So it's just like panels, essentially, where you can drop any block, any field block in.
Yeah, if you're familiar with panels, this stuff should all be really pretty familiar. And in fact, this is a port of panels, but with an all-new UI. And so we took all of the concepts of panels, ported them into Backdrop, and then rewrote the entire user interface. Which, if you've ever used panels, you'd understand why we would do such a thing.
But we tried to keep the concepts the same so that if anyone had any modules from Drupal 7 that were panels-based, porting process would go pretty quickly to Backdrop.
Yep. And you can have multiple layouts on the same path if you want, which would be really common actually. If you want to have each type of content displayed differently, then you would just add another layout at node/%, and then set a different set of conditions. And whichever layout matches the conditions first, then it gets used on that page. So I'm going to hop over to a piece of content like this. And when I actually view the piece of content in place, you can see now we've got this 50-50 layout with this top posts view listing over here on the right-hand side. There's only one item in the view, so doesn't look like a whole lot, but you could tidy that up a little bit.
CMI?
Oh, of course. And this is going to be a little bit tricky to demo because this site has got a lot going on.
Just got to turn off those modules. They fixed that thing.
Okay. So let's do a little introduction first. That in Backdrop, we have configuration management in a way that is similar to Drupal 8, but not quite the exact same. Our system is a little simpler and more direct. Ostensibly, potentially less powerful, but I would say not for practical purposes. So this is a configuration file for like the administration bar, but every single thing that you install or configure on your website, like that layout for the
Posts.
Is it in there?
Which file are you in?
Yeah, it might not be in the right directory.
You mean Pantheon directory.
Backdrop
Pantheon.
Okay. Files. Okay, so one major differentiator is that Backdrop uses JSON for all of its configuration files, and it writes them to actual files. And so as you're changing things, it's literally going to be writing JSON files to disk. And when you're reading things out, it's going to be reading them off of disk. The reason that we've done this is both for simplicity and for performance, that reading them directly off of disk and in a JSON format is extremely fast. But there is also some caching layers in place, just like if you selected all of the views from the database previously, we have the same kind of cache where it's like we cache all of the views in the cache system as well. But for a layout like the post layout that I just assembled, here's the path and the title or the machine name posts that I created, as well as the positions of all these blocks using UUIDs, and then the configuration of those blocks down below. And that's the way all configuration works within Backdrop, which makes it so that if you want to move in between environments, like your local host to a remote server, you can export your configuration or hold that in version control and then move it between environments, which if you've done a lot of Drupal 7 development, that basically means no more features, which is a huge win.
Time saver.
Yeah. Let's see. The interface for importing and exporting is under configuration, development, configuration management. And you can export entire buckets of functionality.
Do a single one first.
What's that?
Do a single one first.
Oh. Yeah, you can also browse your configurations as well. So like that layout that I was just looking at for posts. You can look at individual configuration files here, and then you can import them in between different sites. with a lot of caveats. For simple configuration files, this works most of the time, but for more complex ones, like
Views that depend on fields.
yeah, views that depend on fields or content types or things of that nature, if you try to import it into a different site that is too different, it will throw a bunch of validation saying you can't import that because there's other files that are also dependent upon this one.
Or vice versa.
Yeah, or vice versa. So normally for demonstration, what we would do is...
Open any other, if you go to Chrome.
Normally what we would do for demonstration is we would take a Pantheon site. So this is a brand new site. This is totally brand new, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we would go to configuration management here and import from our local into Pantheon. But I have a feeling that this isn't going to work because this local site is fiddled with.
We just have to go turn on the translation modules. You'll be fine.
Turn on the translation modules?
On the Pantheon site.
Okay, so let's give it a shot.
Well, you could try to do the import first and then show them the error.
Locale 2?
Yeah. Or not.
Yeah. we're out of time, so I wanted to try to get to it. Okay, what's the other one?
That's it.
Content trends. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
and language.
turn on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's give it a shot. Not totally sure because these sites are
It'll be fine.
different.
Everything's fine.
Okay, export. All right, so this exports a archive file. It's on the desktop. And then we'll hop over to the Pantheon site, which is in Chrome. Configuration management. And do a full import. So when you stage the import, it gives you this interface that allows you to see all of the various different configurations. So like these things that were changed, like you can look at system core, for example, and see things like the site title is different from my local one versus the site that is installed on Pantheon, and the email is different, and things like that. And so what this allows you to do is as your live site is likely changing, new content is being created, comments are being posted, that sort of thing, but your dev site is where you're implementing new features and new functionality. So this makes it so that as a developer, you can change the configuration locally, while on the production site, new content is being created. And so you develop and create a new feature through site building and programming or however else, export that functionality, and then import it onto your live site, and it will deploy all of that configuration change all at the same time. I have a feeling we'll see if this goes. Backdrop requires that your modules match between different environments, and in this case, the Pantheon site doesn't have the devel module turned on. Oops, we're already in SF2P mode. It may not even have. It doesn't even have devel at all. So what I could do to make it so this works is I need to go get devel module. So we're going to get a demo project browser after all.
There we go.
There we go. So I've downloaded devel off of backdropcms.org.
Now, a good developer would be like, oh, I don't need my development settings on the live site. I'm going to go turn that off on the dev site and re-export. But since we're short on time, we'll just do it the other way.
So now if I go back to import, okay. Oh, actually, I guess it's still synchronous. It's still staged. So now that devel is in place, yeah, it's actually removed that from the change list because it's identical. It's not changed. So there we go. So I'm doing the import. Yay! And there we go. And so now that has imported things like the configuration of those layouts that that we set up the layout, we set up the view, any changes to our content types. All of those changes are now reflected on this new site as well. So
Huzzah.
Huzzah! That's it. And
There you go.
yeah. We are all out of time, I'm afraid, and we actually, I think we ran over a little bit. Is that correct? Is this end at 3:20 or 3:30?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Well, until the next presenter appears, we can take questions.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions that we could answer real quick?
So what's up with the translation and internationalization?
So translation in Backdrop, the only real improvement that we have over Drupal 7 is transliteration is now in core. But other than that, the translation in Backdrop is pretty much Drupal 7's translation. We are working on adding configuration translation, but for now it's just the same as Drupal 7. That things are basically routed through locale module, and so there's just a bunch of T wrapped calls all over the place. So basically the same as Drupal 7 at this point. And we know that we have some work to do in that area.
We've
And
got
for the content, do you have one node per language?
Right now it's, yeah, one node per language, content translation, the same as Drupal 7. Yep. Any other questions? Any answer? Okay. Well, thank you guys very much for coming. We really appreciate it.